Hi, everybody. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1298th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme honor of being your MC today for a poetry reading and conversation titled Fall of Freedom and curated by the Rail's poetry editor, Erica Hunt. And it will feature readings and conversation by Marcella Durand, Tonya M. Foster, Celina Su, and Erica Hunt. Today's program is organized in solidarity with Fall of Freedom, a nationwide wave of creative resistance and an urgent call to the arts community to unite in defiance of authoritarian forces that are sweeping the US. We invite you to follow the link in the chat to explore the hundreds of Fall of Freedom events happening around the United States today, November 21st, and tomorrow, November 22nd. For today's reading and conversation, Erica, Marcella, Tonya, and Celina will talk about the ways their practice and community around poetry addresses creative resistance and refuge. Biographies for each of today's guests will be posted in the chat, or if you're watching this later, will be below this recording for you to learn more about their writing and work. And with that, and with an enormous amount of gratitude, I'm going to pass everything over to Erica.
Howdy, folks. It's good to see you, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. We are a group of poets, but we're poets plus. We're poets and we're citizens and activists. I'm very happy to be with Marcella Durand, who is a poet. In her bio, again, is in the chat. Also, very glad to be with Tonya Foster, sister from another mister, over in California, and with Celina Su, who I greatly admire, is a poet and an urban planner. Our charge today is to talk about poetry as a creative resistance or art in general as somehow offering something to us and to the important movement that is working now when so many things seem very wrong, right? What does poetry offer to us? What does poetry offer as practitioners, as community, as readers, as people who love language? So the format is we're basically going to have a reading. We're going to read, and we'll also speak to the people who inspire us. We'll talk about quotes that we have found or things that have stirred stuff in us and help us to reframe what it means to creatively resist and to build a present that respects people and respects art and literature. So we're going to read in alphabetical order, except I'm going to read last. As I said, you can read Marcella's bio in the chat, and I'm going to ask for you to begin. Marcella, lead us, open us up.
Thank you so much, Erica, for gathering us all together for this amazing two-day gathering of artists, right? Gathering. And thank you to the Brooklyn Rail, to Chloe, and thanks to everyone who's here today. I'm going to start with a little audio clip of a song that's pretty much been staying with me through this whole. People often describe this time as dark, and being a poet, I want to question and break into that term. So I'm gonna share my computer off. Okay, so this song is "The Sky is a Sea of Darkness" by Sun Ra.
Of darkness when there is no sun. The sky is a sea of darkness when there is no sun to light the way. when there is no sun to light the way. There is no day. There is no day. There's only darkness. Eternal sea of darkness.
So, can you all hear me now? Yeah, that song has just been in my head, and I think about it over and over again. And it's so deeply about art because the lyrics it's darkness. It's all darkness, and yet the song is so beautiful. And so the song is the hope. And my immediate reaction is like, oh, darkness, how frightening. But then darkness is what precedes possibility and creation and gives us rest and rejuvenation. And turns out, I mean, there's just so many ways to turn that song and how it holds that darkness within it. So yeah, I've been listening to that pretty much every day. I'm going to read from a Winter Triangle, which I just got this fall of my work. Heavenly Wolf Star. On the western Han vase in the museum, the mounted archer represents the bow constellation that keeps the heavenly wolf star under control. The bow constellation points its arrow at the wolf star to prevent the wolf star from leading the cosmos into chaos and strife. But in different times, the wolf star chafes at the eternal vigilance of order. Straight arrow bow maintains rules, whether good or bad. Bow continually enforces order and deadens progress or protest. The wolf is drawn with an incredible energy, all purple and speed lines, while bow is almost invisible among its constituent stars. The Heliacal Star. The wolf star oversees thievery and looting. But what when accuser is also a thief? What when enforcers of the law become above the law, lawless? Why the mirror is important and what is looking back? When the size of an image increases by 10 billion magnitude. But the wolf star is also the dog star, or Sirius, which means glowing, because it is slowly moving closer to Earth, and as it moves closer, it will burn brighter before it dwindles. A heliacal star, it rises before and sets after the sun, first and last visible when it emerges from the sun's rays, when it brightens behind helioelectric emanations, when the sun passes through any of the 12 signs, when the rivers flood and dogs lie in the heat. Other brighter stars more distant seem dimmer. How distance creates a perception of unimportance when those small points are actually burning importantly and need to be seen clearly. Where the spear points. The wolf dog star rises with the sun in July and August during the long days named after what the star is named after. In the pre-dawn sky in August, you will see the flashing wolf star held back by the invisible consortium of stars in the bow constellation. The stars arrayed behind the arrow give the bow constellation its power. The community of stars imagined together to explain the star at the tip of the arrow rising at pre-dawn to challenge the sun. Sirius, or the wolf star, is actually Sirius A, and there's a Sirius B. It is an Alpha Canis Majoris B, as the wolf star is an Alpha Canis Majoris A. They orbit each other and one wobbles. The bow constellation aims its arrow at the large bright star and its dimmer partner. Sometimes Sirius A is the star at the arrow's tip in other interpretations of constellations and asterisms. The star is either the enforcer or the recipient of force. It is the law transforming into lack of the law. If the theater were open air, if the theater were open to sky, Stars become actors, constellations the script, galaxies, special effects, the effects of distant explosions, because distance may be violence. The universe is explosion and violence and car chases. If the play, I mean the universe, were a buddy movie, action, adventure, thriller in the bodies of men infinitely reflected, six-packs stand in the front and refracted, square-jawed, refracted, hands on the hips, weeping, shoulders compacted, bowed under the weight of their muscles. What number are they in the mirrors bowing endlessly behind them? Where's the one with the arrow to step forward and maintain order? Is there no one? Is there many behind the one, behind the point of the one? What sort of order is a cheap acrylic mirror lined with foil, photographed on the cell, photographed again, and after that, frames sped 24 zillion per second, unwatchable except on the inside eyelid screen. Cast a light, cast, gasp, ding, gasp, gasp, a scene startles. Major foot lifts, helicopter rotor, pulls back hair, tie flies. Just announced of great importance, sets precedent. Tie flies, buttons, jacket. I am with mouth agape into sun. Sun is gold, nothing else, only gold. Fire, not air. Faces dark, gold, not fire. Time is slow, earth circles slowly, time is slow, sun never rises, rotor circles slowly in silence. It is not space that is eternal. We find the infinite in time, in eternal city, in never-ending city. What will we make of space? What will we compose out of senseless splendor? War endures, as does poetry. May film stills be a constellation of stars, all glossy lips and marcelled hair, fur-like eyelashes throwing long shadows down cheeks. Their hair named after me named after the god of war. Bow takes on arrow, arrow shoots back. My first name is war, my last name is endurance, and strangely I am a poet inventing a new form of poetry in the infinity of space, in manifestation yet to be. Thank you all.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. The stars run its course. Tonya, Dr. Foster. Mhm.
Miss E, thank you for the invitation to, I don't know, to speak when largely I feel a certain kind of desire to listen more intently. Marcella, thank you for that magnificent reading. Um, it's a fantastic book. So get it. I'm reading neither poetry nor anything particularly hopeful. But I'd like to start with, it's funny, yesterday I was talking with a group of writers and I said, don't listen to this song. And I've been listening to this song on repeat and I realized there's a certain way it's begun to freak me out. Um, and it's Portrait of Linda by Sunny Sharrock. And I just want to play a brief excerpt and then read to you the two quotes that I'm kind of sitting with all the time. And this is, I also shouldn't say that the act of writing is itself hopeful. It's a refusal to be utterly despairing and an utter silence. So, yeah. So this is the song, and I'm not sure what's the turning point that it's begun to freak me out. But it has. Um, see. Maybe it's not. Okay.
Tanya, is it playing?
It is, but
So,
you can't hear it.
no, we can't hear it. There
But
should
what
be,
if I share the audio?
yeah, try that. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Um, I'm not seeing a way to do that. Well, I'll
So,
just go on so that I don't hold us up. So the two quotes, look for it, A Portrait of Linda in Three Colors by Sunny Sharrock. Um, and it's sort of a scream, um, a deep expression of the kind of screaming in the sense that I have of things. The two quotes are, there was a conversation that Bernice Johnson Reagan was having with Charlie Rose. And she was talking about movement music. And there's a moment in the interview where she says, she's describing when the song emerges, when activists are out and are being surrounded. And she said, and someone will start to sing. And that then our voices will rise and the song will maintain the air as your territory. That. And the other for me is from Amiri Baraka's The Revolutionary Theater. And he talks about what is called the imagination is a practical vector from the soul. It stores all data and can be called on to solve all our problems. The imagination is the projection of ourselves past our sense of ourselves as things. Imagination is all possibility because from the image, the initial circumscribed energy, any use is possible. And so begins that image's use in the world. Possibility is what moves us. And this is an excerpt, and I'm setting the timer. So I will just stop when the timer goes off. This is from my overdue manuscript, Mathematics of Chaos. Water like language, like water, like language, like water, like language, like otters, like language, like daughters, like otters, like licking, like lapping, language, wagons, waters. One, a few years after Katrina, when I returned to New Orleans to live and teach, as my mother moved back into her reconstructed home in New Orleans East, a home reconstructed after Hurricane Katrina's unceremonial deconstruction of the home my mother had so carefully made. I met regularly with my cousin Kay at Tulane, my alma mater, and my employer at the time, where Kay also worked. Growing up, Kay had been my babysitter. She was the older cousin we had to listen to. She was and still is our protector. Over those meals in the school's inadequate cafeteria, Kay and I talked about home, talked about memory, talked about New Orleans. Carlos, Kay and her mother, aunt by dissolved marriage, had not left New Orleans before the hurricane, and they found themselves, like many of us, surprised by its magnitude and force. Though we had often imagined what might could be, speculative storms, catastrophes, disasters, cruelties, often feel, we think or imagine, far enough off the shores of is for us to keep doing as we've always done, for us to keep rowing in the waters we think we can weather, in the waters we think we know well enough to survive in, the waters we think we have no other choice but to weather or drown in. And the will to drown or the will to not drown, its own magnitude and force. Kay and her mother, aunt by dissolved marriage, had not left New Orleans and were two of the over 15,000 citizens who took what was offered as refuge in the New Orleans Superdome, now rebranded as Mercedes-Benz Superdome, or rather Caesar's Superdome. Over coffee or lunch, Kay talked about her experiences during the storm, about how she and her mother made their way to the dome from the Calliope, officially B.W. Cooper, and pronounced Calliope by official non-natives projects. Once it became clear how serious the flooding was, she talked about the smells of sewage and garbage that covered their skin and clothing. Calliope, by the by, is the muse of epic poetry. Talked about the backed up and overflowing toilets and the horrible smell of human waste and rot, about how it contributed to the sense of despair, the sense that the smell signaled end of days. Our current president is said to smell. There was a sense that there was no way out for Kay, surrounded and abandoned in like shit. My older cousin Kay didn't recognize herself or her life, and the post-Katrina Kay I met for lunch was markedly different from the Kay I'd known all my life. I was markedly different from the self I'd imagined myself to be or become. We are among the haunted, haunted by the varied weights of delicacy, haunted by the breaking speed of home, haunted that the breaking speed of home equals the breaking speed of the car's constructed body, equals the ease of breaking connections, tender and less so, equals breaking what might be called spirit with a scent there is no escaping, equals the breaking out of gunfire over the heads of those seeking refuge in Gretna, which pimps itself as the new New Orleans. What is the state of subjectivities in as debris, their figurations, performances? 2. More broadly, more than 60% of the world's populations live without toilets. In many places, there's open defecation near waterways and walkways. I'd like to find out where the toilets aren't. I think about the smells Kay described, about how we adjust or don't. I suspect that those persons and bodies considered by state power, by capital, by urban planning as debris are placed nearest to debris or toxins. What is allowed to rot? Where is rot allowed? On opposing sides of the scale are ghettoization and gentrification, the devalued and the overvalued. On city subway platforms and cars, we who are not unhoused often turn or move quickly away from the clearly homeless person, especially if there's a smell of human waste. Uncleanness and devaluation equal easy old school equivalencies. But what if there is no turning away, like the rider on the train? According to some, theorist whom I won't name at the moment. Trash doesn't disappear despite leaving our immediate experience. Is this memory? What are the consequences of the apparent disappearance? Certainly, we're comforted by its absence from our immediacy. That comfort is possible because of a particular individualistic view of the self and the world, a certain willful forgetting of shit to our physical and social bodies, its necessity to the processes of living. Without shit or shit, we die. In a load of shit, John Berger contends that shit is what is left behind, undifferentiated, the waste from energy received and burnt up. This energy has myriad forms, but for us humans, with our human shit, all energy is partly verbal. Again, with the leaving. What if there is no leaving? What's done with the shit in the midst of shit? Is there an ecology of subjectivities that shit suggests and potentially illuminates? Sadia Hartman's project to comprehend how a boy came to be worth 3 yards of cotton cloth and a bottle of rum, or a woman equivalent to a basket full of calories, and to cross the boundary that separates kin from stranger, involves navigating archived and disregarded materials. The trace materials are largely blood, shit, and dirt, some way through the muck. What's to be done with experience, with what is past experience, with what has been made of waste? Although I wasn't born here, my relatives on occasion have taunted me by calling me Yankee, though of course I have never and would never taunt them with Confederates. Home is New Orleans, that dyke enclosed fabrication caught among the Mississippi River, the Gulf of Mexico, and Lake Pontchartrain, the three tongues which dictate the wills and ways of the city. The word Mississippi arrives via a French phonetic transcription, Mississippi, of an Anishinaabe word, Mississippi, which means great river. Water like language, like water, like language, like water. Thanks. Thank you. And I don't know if that was all.
That's great. You put yourself on mute, but that was wonderful. Wonderful. Water like language, like water, like language, like water. Celina, please. Thank you. Wow.
Wow.
Ears are full. Mhm.
Yeah, I sort of just want to sit with those words like water. But thank you so much, Erica. Thank you, Chloe, Magli, Marcella, Tonya. I feel so honored to be here with you. I'm still deciding on the order of things, but I think I'll start with a very recent, unprocessed or relatively unprocessed draft of a poem that's part of a series of letter poems with the poet and journalist Alyssa Quart. And the series is called Attention Economy, of us just trying to not succumb to the overwhelm and the seduction of despair and just trying to think through this moment. In this one, I'm thinking about First Amendment auditors, who are these folks that right-wing groups send to universities to try to record professors and catch them saying something that they then make viral. So we've been warned about these every semester for the past few semesters. And also, I mentioned the Fired Four, who include a couple of students of mine who um, who lost their jobs and their health insurance, etc., um, for showing up at a Gaza protest. Citizen. Each semester, I receive institutional instructions not for the classroom, but the hallways, to be as boring as possible, to sing as a broken record, to repeat that they may record but not disturb our work, to still myself, personify a gray rock. What sort of gray rock? Igneous, sedimentary, metamorphic? Am I made by cooling, by an accumulation of slights and cuts, or by intense pressure? Morphing from teacher to analyst to mere witness as if these were discrete roles. For court watchers, signal. For ice watchers, salute. My impatience as the cryptopad doc reconstitutes itself, wherein walking next to someone in public constitutes obstruction, invites arrest. I try to read between the lines of the statistics. My neighbors plead. We especially need white presenting folks. I review my chances of detention, of doxing. Could I, as a friend fears, become denaturalized, as if I had been artifice and after 5 years here became flesh? Or, eyeing my old green card status, a sudden opposite of alien, a resident earthling, a resident familiar. My adjunct colleagues and students are fired, scratch that. They receive, quote unquote, letters declining reappointments. Officially, the admin can't share why. Unofficially, for they linked arms and in public, bearing witness like tiny fishing boats in front of a whaling ship, as in adorned by rusting metal and a freshly painted crosswalk, as in bureaucratically, counting on the dead of summer, on stifling, on wilting, counting the living. The heat guarantees no light. If they override all protocols, evaluations, scores, documents, each faculty letter, student protest, departmental vote, then what? My students' charges remain unknown, which is not, as they claim, unknowable. Um, I'm going to read actually a piece of prose um, from my new book, Budget Justice, which is about city budgets. And some of you may have heard parts of this before. This is from the prologue where I try to think about where my politics came from, especially my racial and class politics. So it does come back to this question of thinking about the role of art and the imagination. I especially was wanted to do this when folks had asked me for a sort of positionality statement, because there are these aspects of immigrant subjectivities that can be very vulnerable to politics of resentment and neoliberal rationalities, I think. So this is from the prologue. I moved to the US from Brazil in the late 1980s. Newly arrived in New York City and then moving around the Northeast, my father took computer programming classes at the RAI. As advertised with 1-800 numbers on Saturday afternoon network TV, he became a computer programmer. My mother had taken similar classes in Brazil and became a database systems analyst. Sometimes my parents had trouble finding full-time jobs, and I remember my father coming home with fingers riddled with pinpricks he got from folding button-down shirts at Macy's. As a teenager, I took on jobs babysitting for $3 an hour, working in a bookstore for $6.02 an hour, and delivering the free local newspaper and marveling at the $5 tip one household gave me before the winter holidays. If I thought about socioeconomic class at all, my focus was limited to my own family and how I might contribute to alleviating the ever-present sense of financial precarity. I rarely thought about other households. When I did so, it was usually to envy the Joneses. When I got into grad school, I called my parents with the news. I remember my father stating, "You did okay," as in, "Good job, you did all right," for what felt like the first time in my life. In that moment, I could so easily be read as a model minority, as an embodiment of the American dream, as if I wore proper boots with nice long bootstraps. I moved to the US from Brazil in the late 1980s. That part is true. But the rest of my story has many different versions. I moved just in time for the glory years of middle school, not knowing any English. I didn't recognize some of the new math notation and kept getting D's. When I asked in class, when I asked questions in class, I was told MYOB. I wondered what myobe, which I mentally pronounced myobe as if it were a biological microbe, meant until I realized years later that it stood for mind your own business. I don't know what prompted the vice principal to suddenly label me an honors kid. My educational achievements were probably shaped as much by chance as they were by my own efforts, if not more so. In high school, I simply went through the motions of being a student without a calling or strong community to lend me a sense of mission. I remember a classmate skipping lunch junior year so that she could take an additional AP science class. I could not relate. Friends whose families had strong ethnic or religious networks filled me with envy. I was into fashion and sewed a different sloppy punk outfit for each day of an entire grade. In college, I occasionally showed up to affinity group meetings, like ones for Asian Americans, but never felt quite at ease there. With a vague sense of political and class consciousness, I sympathized with, but was not actively involved in, student actions regarding sweatshop labor conditions. I moved to the US from Brazil in the late 1980s, when I learned to respect authority, but also that official narratives could not always be trusted. Because I was not yet 16 when my parents became naturalized citizens, I automatically became one as well, without documentation. According to some federal databases, I am a citizen. According to others, I am not. This felt apropos given that my father's documents misstate his birthplace, his birth country, and my mother's her birth date. While I was growing up in Brazil, it was my job to note not only the official Brazilian cruzeiro to US dollar currency exchange rate, but also the real black market one, and to report both of these to my parents. In my family, our official histories are mistaken, and our real ones become apocryphal. Maybe I was a late bloomer, reliant on adolescent signifiers, along with a taste in clothes, film, and music, to stand in for my own analyses and politics. I had trouble envisioning practices of solidarity outside of zine making and the like. I had received a lot of lessons about self-reliance and interpersonal kindness and Republicans versus Democrats, but I had little exposure to unions, community organizing, worker cooperatives, coordinated mutual aid, or different forms of collective action. And maybe, too, I had inherited a distrust of institutional politics and desire for politics in another form. I'm going to skip ahead to one paragraph later in the book. Policymakers know how to render social goods private, to privatize, but not how to render them public again. Publicize is certainly not the right word. With so much overt and de facto privatization of public space and private provision of what should be public goods, it is no wonder that when it comes to what citizenship practices should look and feel like, many citizens are out of practice. Public policies focused on choice rob communities of meaningful change and enfeeble the popular imagination of what could be. The work of strengthening popular imaginations begins with quotidian practices. As poet and scholar Monica de la Torre questions, people read the paper in the morning. At night, they turn to fictions. What kinds of dreams would reversing this simple habit precipitate? And I want to close out by reading one more part of a paragraph from Freedom Dreams. Sometimes I think the conditions of daily life, of everyday oppressions, of survival, not to mention the temporary pleasures accessible to most of us, render much of our imagination inert. We are constantly putting out fires, responding to emergencies, finding temporary refuge, all of which make it difficult to see anything other than the present. As the great poet Gerobetse Kokositsile put it, when the clouds clear, we shall know the colors of the sky. When movements have been unable to clear the clouds, it has been the poets, no matter the medium, who have succeeded in imagining the color of the sky, in rendering the kinds of dreams and futures social movements are capable of producing. Knowing the color of the sky is far more important than counting clouds. Or to put it another way, the most radical art is not protest art, but works that take us to another place, envision a different way of seeing, perhaps a different way of feeling. And this is from Freedom Dreams by Robin D.G. Kelley. Thank you.
I guess it's my turn. Thank you so much, Celina, for that, reminding us that there is a sky. I'm going to, Marcella, if you can turn off your sound share, please. I can share screen. Thank you.
I'm not sure it's on.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Maybe. Well, okay. I'll just maybe not share my screen then.
Erica,
Yeah.
I can help here.
You can turn it off.
Yeah,
Mhm.
let me try this.
I unchecked everything, but I don't.
Mhm. Sometimes a poem is a little bit more, if it's visible, it's a little more legible, if you will. Thank you. Thank you.
You should be able
So,
to share now.
okay. Yep. Thank you. Okay. Okay. You're getting into the vault. Into the vault. See. Oops, what happened? Oh, really into the vault. Here we go. 3 new poems. A Tree in Flames after Jack Whitten's painting. We watch and don't leave our assigned seats on Broken Planet, but we get up on it after hearing the alarm. I mean, what other planet do we got? There are lakes and other bodies of water, and they appear outwardly calm. But looks can be deceiving, especially here on Broken Planet. Weeds tower and could easily strip the paint or swallow you up in segments with their slimy, gaping mouths or mud slick palms, pulling you come closer, to examine your texture. You're not from around here, are you? As if impatient to answer their own question. Is that nature spinning the sky and ground, or is it vice versa? A bottle given a good shake sends the weather topsy turvy. We do not rise from our seats. We are given to spectacle. We are given to spectacle, given to gazing at the silvery, oily sheens shimmering on the surface of our distraction. I spy an eye turned away from the screen. I see a flaming tree, and no amount of watery landscape quenches or distracts me. I am not the only person gasping from the smoke or noticing the surfaces drifting apart. If you stare long enough, you notice lips breaking the surface of the water, pursed lips for air somewhere, for air somewhere, leaf, foliage, air, smoke, shimmer, even as the greenest gray silvers the mud, the brackish parts, and heads and hands poking through what's meant as backdrop, meant to disappear, appears as holes through which our neighbors have fallen. It's an excerpt from Mood Librarian. It may have been a coincidence, but the year the boss was elected was also the year we experienced a great variety of mayhem, first-hand, more than rumored apocalypse handed down by grandparents or read about in the far away anywhere but here. In our midst, the bad enough commenced to bleed with no end to the end. No end to the end. Precursors of disasters, unending, undoing. The boss accelerated it all, failed science to fuel his swagger, multiplied sociopathic ideas to which we were already susceptible, vulnerable on arrival. Disarmed the armor with casually toxic syntax. The boss was bluster and seduction. He was fluent in the language of God's green acres pronounced over someone else's land, bucolic and folksy, with an unconcealed evil and brutality towards others, intent on harm. The boss heaped blame on blame, blame on flame, until flame licked white, racing to the top of self-gain. The boss stoked anger at strangers, and the flames, they were easy to fan, opened a better view for the crowd to watch them burn. Burn it all down. The boss was chief fire master, a paint thinner, a match striker, every surface emblazoned with his persimmon face, eye-rolling pageantry. Burn it all down. The crowd looked like foot soldiers in search of the next lynching, fanning outward any enemy to upend and find comfort in its them to unstick and us to force all to kiss gravel, finding the power of death in an undoing an enemy who shares the same sun, same bottom of the clock, same stick in the eye, same pattern of shadow cast from the feet, same result when the breath stops mid. The wind blows through my clothes, limp flags at rest, and cool-handed, kissed flesh awake, close enough to stretch from stalk to stem to heart, unready for spring's rhizome reach. I am she who swerves. I didn't see it coming, say some, their heads fallen, shared fate. I like the idea of azaleas, their hum, ideas independent of low lows and high highs, their resilience in unpredictable weather. Spring, rain, spring, sun, spring, gale, spring, snow. I've learned you can't depend on what will be here one day to the next. But some have learned to wait. Soil's rising temperature, prod bulbs, elegant pierce, hard packed dirt and tangled brack give way to messy margins, wintered seeds, evade gangster, sweet tooth squirrels. I have learned. I have been yearning to practice the voice. A garden off grid is certainty, abandoned yet fruitful within its gates. A nod to errant weeds, truant explorations gives ground to the possibility to live anew. Life, unconfined, undomesticated yet calm. I felt the wind blow through me, a gale, cool and red-handed, coming close to me, reminded that spring releases roots spiraling, and we couldn't predict how it would come. An unstoppable and unharnessed hush. And then finally, I want to share a quote from Susan Griffin's essay called On Resistance and Imagination, a Marigold. And in it, she tells this story about, which maybe we'll get into, about Robert Desnos and how he imagined a life in the midst of the camps. And surrealist poet, for those who don't know, and how he predicted a long life to those fellow prisoners who were headed towards the chambers, the gas chambers. And he looked at their palms as they were at the doorway of the gas chambers, and he said, "Oh, I see a long life for you, 3 kids, lots of joy." The guards looked aghast. What? What? And he looked at someone else's palm, said, "What do you," and the person said, "What do you see here?" And he says, I see a long life. You and your wife watching you're watching a sunset." And they said, "What? We're at the doors of the chambers. We're about to enter the dark. What?" And Dano looked at another hand and predicted an equally long life for each of them. And finally, the guards looked around and said, "What is he seeing? What could he be seeing? Maybe he's right." And miraculously, really, they loaded back up on the truck. And they went back to their barracks. The guards decided he must be seeing something. What do we see? What do we see? That's what the question of this reading is in the Fall of Freedom. What do artists see? And can the act of seeing change us and change the people around us? Susan Griffin observes, perception is not simply a reflection of reality, but a powerful element of reality. Anyone who meditates has had this experience. Observing the activities of the mind changes the mind until bit by bit, observation creates great changes in the soul. All the artistic and literary movements, social movements, are driven by imagination. Not only the songs, importantly, and the poems and the paintings that have always been part of those movements, but something in the social movement and the acts of imagination reconfigure the world. So with that, I thank everybody for their attention and I look forward to your questions. Comments.
We invite you to submit your questions at the link in the chat if you have questions for this group. I want to thank you all so much for those really, really amazing readings. Did you all want to have a chance to chat with each other while we're waiting for some of the questions to come in?
It's funny. One of the things in the Baraka quote that really interests me, moves me actually, is the idea of movement, the sort of capacity of the imagination, not only to change what we see, but how we see. And it opens up possibilities, which is what I think Susan Griffith gets at.
Mhm.
What are the sort of possible ways of experiencing the world and of being differently situated, even in a particular circumstance? And that I think there's something about, and even with Bernice Johnson Reagan, that the power of the imagination to map out other territories that are not logical, that are not on the official maps, but other spaces in which we sort of make community together, is profound for me.
Yeah, that seems to be a theme of poetry as illumination, or poetry as making this unseen seen. Things that haven't found language yet. And that transition, that transformation. Audre Lorde says that where language does not exist yet, it is our poetry which helps us fashion it, helps us fashion language that we don't quite have, the not yet. And we really are in the not yet right now. It's prolonged, it's brutal, excruciatingly long in our not yetness. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who has thought, oh, now this is it. It's this dark moment, this moment of gestation or something dying, which is truth, right? Something is dying, is about to like kind of yield to something else, um, yield to something that we're building now. We're not completely aware of its pieces. Poetry helps us to get to some of what that might consist of, the not yet, beyond the not yet.
And there's a way that it brings it so home through sound and juxtaposition. And so, I mean, Celina, like the situation with the teachers, it just was so visceral when you described walking side by side someone down, and just the poetic aspect that you brought to that situation was just like, oh my God, this is unbelievable that teachers have to be boring and dull. And I mean, the antithesis of poetry, I guess, is to be boring and dull. So I just find it a very wonderful vehicle to carry this realization through.
I wonder if that's the AI modeling, right? So homogenization, it's the inability to contend with the variant and the kind of incorrect and inappropriate. And so the banning of words is about limiting the possibility for thought, which is also about limiting the possibility for action
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that is beyond reaction, right? But action as a creative act. Yeah. No. Hmm. The emptying out.
Further evidence of that is one story. I collect these things, of course. There's a story of some school district in Florida that has removed the dictionary. And then the library says the dictionary is suspect, which of course doesn't even allow for innovative or new usage, much less old usage. The whole thing is fraught with peril. Our language, our very language is fraught with peril, which means that we're on the right track. But still, um, it must mean the depth of reaction has to signal that.
Well, there's one aspect to that story about Robert Desnos that I just was thinking about, was it was not just his creative action, but the people interpreting it and picking it up and reacting to it, which is so wonderful that he had a receptive, interactive audience. Right?
I know, I know, I know.
And I think a lot about that too, is that just the way poetry is taught and treated as nothing, and we're constantly having to justify it all the time. It's like this attempt to opacify, make us oblique, a mystery or anything, to deaden that picking up of it, the freedom to take the poem and create a collaborative act of imagination together, right? Mm.
That's
Well,
well
and I
said.
also, yeah,
No, go for it. Go for it.
no, I mean that's the piece of it for me, right? It's that moment of being moved. So that then there's a way the soldiers are moved because it's easier to put to death those you imagine are already dead.
Mm,
There's a certain kind of force and violence required to
mhm,
stamp out the life of those who are engaged in life even at the moment. I mean, I think of the sort of violent reaction to Black people laughing,
mhm, mhm,
right? That
mhm,
it's being engaged in a sort of life moment that says, no, all of me cannot, in fact, be consumed by this act of violence that you are doing, which actually, displays the lie to the sense of power. There's a scene in Beloved when I think Sixo is being hanged, and yet he knows that Setha has escaped and is pregnant. And he's saying, 7-0, 7-0, 7-0 in that moment of death. And it's not that he doesn't die, it's life anyway. And that to me is the act of resistance. It's also the moment um, when things get even crazier. The violence becomes more pronounced. Usually, what's interesting in the story of Desnos is that the guards are moved to it, that they don't begin beating the prisoners or saying, get back in line. Um, because that moment of joy actually reveals their own monstrosity. That's it's the life anyway. I am not merely a cord of wood, but a living, breathing person. Um, yeah.
I can jump in here with a few questions from the audience if you'd like to think about.
yes, please.
Um, I've got something here from Charles at Chax who says, just to say there is not only an attack on poetry, but an attack on history, particularly creative views of history that might enlighten the present. Every time I teach works from the past, they turn out to be highly relevant to now. I wonder if you all want to chat a little bit about that together.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. There's a way that history is, even the past is a history, the way that we interpret it is a history of the present, right? We interpret history, we read history in with the present set of lenses, right? So, and we have various stakes, we have a stake in it, you know, and we reread historical event and we go, oh, the George Washington, the tree, or whatever we're looking at, we look at not with their eyes and how that legend or semi-historical thing was formed, but also the knowledge that we have now. George Washington as a man who stole his enslaved servants' dentures, right? we, we, we read that history very differently than what's been passed on. History is a history. History is about the present, is a history of the present. And if we kind of look at it that way, we begin to understand our present a little better and what we could possibly think of as a possible future or the way we want to live and build a future.
Um, I think that phrase, history of the present, resonates with me a lot in drawing upon the urban planner side that Erica referenced. I think about how it's hard for people to think of or at least like some of my politics students sometimes to think of neighborhoods as something different and that this wasn't inevitable. And to look at maps even from as recently as 100 years ago and look at redlining maps and see that the neighborhoods that were redlined are exactly the ones now that suffer from heat waves during each summer in the face of climate change. And like in Baltimore, for instance, the red line neighborhoods can be 16 degrees hotter on a hot summer day than the grade A high income neighborhoods because they have fewer trees and more parking lots from the decades of disinvestment and this and so all these things that look so inevitable now with history, they see the active construction and the active political choices behind them rather than it just being so default. Um, and and that's the part of the Death Note story for me also that just like was so moving of how even a generous interpretation of the guards might say like, they were complicit partly because if they were thinking about it, maybe partly because they felt like it was inevitable and there was no use to trying to resist. Um,
I've been kind of interested in parsing George Washington lately, that there's like this comparison going on. Like, well, George Washington would never have tweeted
Yes.
to execute his enemies. And so you're kind of, oh, well, I guess George Washington wasn't such a, horrible slave owner dude. Right? Like, I mean, I just kind of, history is coming together right now. History is alive, and the way the past is being reframed in comparison to the horrific is something we want to parse. And I think poetry always makes you critical too. Is that you're always taking the cube and turning it around and around, um, and I that you're looking for the unpredictable and the weird and the side by side juxtapositions, and things were so much better before right now, I'm like, no, not necessarily. So yeah, but yeah, just to pick up on George Washington there, I was um interested in that lately.
Well, I think that's fascinating, right? I love what you said about um, poetry being critical, that art is necessarily critical, and that if we take the sort of the term critical or to critique, it's to look at the parts. And that part of where art, there is an attempt to do this kind of separation between art and the act of criticism. And um, I think that's to make art seemingly palatable. And that I actually think, like, I love Josh Johnson, comedian, young guy from Louisiana,
Mhm.
not the cool part, not New Orleans, but he says it himself. He's from that other part of Louisiana. And one thing he said in one of his routines, he's giving this talk and he's actually talking about Kendrick Lamar's performance at the Super Bowl. And as he ends it, he goes, and there's a certain kind of there's this beautiful exasperation, and he says, art can save your life. And so then he says it again, art can save your life. And he says, entertainment is great. He said, and it helps you escape. And then he says, nobody ever lost their chains by forgetting they had them.
Mm, mhm.
And so I think of the sort of different
Really.
operations, right? That being entertained has, and that art has. And so when I think of that Carol Capacci, and I can't say his last name either, the Carol Pazzili last line that you read, Celina, where when the clouds move, we'll be able to see the colors of the sky. Like, I don't think it's that we'll see the sky and forget where we are. It's the awareness that the clouds are there and blocking us, and that it isn't the sky of escape, but it's really an analysis on what is blocking our vision, and by blocking our vision, also blocking our action. The thing about history for me, this is a weird, I feel like I'm approaching things from this slanted uh, thinking, but I think of uh, Miles Davis, this quote on the Avant-Garde. He says, and I always think of this Miles Davis quote next to Gertrude Stein. Davis says about the Avant-Garde, he said, nobody's ahead of their time. You're either right on time or you're late. And then I think of Gertrude Stein, who says, that by the time something becomes known, that the people we designate as the avant-gardists are the people who are wholly present. They're taking in all the crap at the moment. And so nobody can quite deal with them because they're not looking at them in the past. I think this is, yeah, anyway. So I think about history and I think about that, right? That at the moment we have people telling all these different histories and almost creating a crazy quilt of any given moment, right? That crazy quilt becomes dangerous because the homogenizing, the homogenizing story that says the only thing that matters is this series of events and these people next to each other, that's how you think about the world. That's the stuff that's killing us. That also allows the murder of any deviant interest, idea, perspective, whatever, which actually might save our lives. Sorry, that was like, but that's how my head works, especially without coffee.
I'm so glad your head works that way. He gave us some good quotes. Any more, Chloe?
We had one other question, which is, I think, pretty easy to answer, but Jess Winston is curious if you all would mind sharing what you read in the chat for them so that they can have a list of what you read today. They'd love to revisit.
Oh, the essays, sure.
We can also send that via
Yeah,
email to.
yeah, if you could do that, because I sent some things, and so did Marcella, and Tonya quoted a few things as well.
And we can include the songs too, so that
Mhm.
everyone can go
Good.
and listen. Well, is there anything else you want to discuss together before we close out?
How are y'all? I mean, basic, how are y'all doing?
Yeah, how is everybody? That's a good question.
It's really not a trick
It's a
question.
quiet
I
group.
mean that question.
They're eating lunch.
Unless
Yep.
they're on the west, well, maybe on the West Coast, an early lunch.
Mhm.
Coffee.
Well,
Well,
however, may you travel gently.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go gently. Take care of yourself. Take care of others too. we're so glad you could join us this afternoon. And I'm hoping that
Yes,
we
thank you.
provided some food for thought. Okay.
I just want to thank you all so much for your readings and conversation today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I really encourage today's audience to check out the hundreds of events going on in New York alone for Fall of Freedom today. It's really inspiring to see so many arts organizations organizing readings and conversations on this topic, and hope you'll get to enjoy some others. One plug for our friends at the Bureau List Center for Art and Politics at the New School. They're doing reading marathon today that started at 9 a.m. and finishes at 9 p.m. called Studies into Darkness, a reading marathon for freedom of speech. I encourage you to check that out. They're going to be reading for the rest of the day until 9 p.m. And there's a link in the chat with more information on that. We're fundraising right now. We're a nonprofit at the Rail. If you have the opportunity to donate to us to help us continue our work and continue this series, every little bit helps. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., we're so delighted to welcome Deannie Whitehawk and Laura Phipps on the event of Deannie Whitehawk Love Language at Walker Art Center for a conversation of is a Rail tradition. You all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much.
much.
Wonderful.
Erica. Hi, Marcella.
It's good to see you.
Thank you.
So
Good to
much.
see you, everyone. Good to see you.
Good to see everyone. Thank you for reading your
Professor
work.
Foster.
Bye-bye.
So much.
Bye.
See you on campus, Professor Foster.
Hey, who is that?
We met at a reading in the Poetry
Yes,
Center.
we did.
I came with my daughter. She's
Very
running around in the back somewhere.
Good to see everyone.
Lovely to see you.
So good
See
to
you on campus,
take
Teresa.
care, everybody. Take
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.